Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone to this session of the European Business Summit on boosting entrepreneurship for a sustainable EU-Africa economic partnership. I'm just going to start with some very brief comments on the context, and then I'll introduce our speakers. The context for the EU-Africa partnership is that many countries across Africa are achieving strong economic growth, and the continent is seen as a very significant economic bloc. Many of the countries have strong agendas to move towards being middle-income countries, which is really very important. However, economic growth in Africa is complex. Firstly, it's a continent. It has 54 countries, and they're all very diverse. As we know, there's still considerable poverty across the continent. A high proportion of the population lacks access to basic resources, including water, electricity, and therefore it's a major focus for the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is a strong focus around the world on enabling those. On the other hand, Africa has huge resources for growing its economies. It has a wealth of agricultural land. It has many minerals, which are highly valuable for their use in industry in different parts of the world. It has a huge potential for renewable energy, both from the sun, from the wind, and so on. So that's another of its assets. And I think very importantly too, it has a growing youth population. It has a youth population who are growing up in the digital world and will bring energy, innovation, and a very strong population to enable the growth in jobs. So the EU and Africa are neighbours. They've always had a strong sense of working together, reinforcing one another. And now they really do want to work together on delivering jobs across the continent, making that economic potential realised through growing jobs on the continent. So during this session, our speakers will be looking at how this in reality can be made to happen, because we can talk about it at a high level, but we have to come down to the practicalities of how to make it work. And that's what we want to discuss today. So I'd like to just at the start of this session make an announcement to the participants that the Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, very much wanted to be here today. Unfortunately, she had a conflict that that has prevented her. However, she has asked Laura Borisova, who is her senior cabinet expert with the portfolio for Africa on international partnerships, to intervene on her part. So we'll be hearing from Laura in a few minutes. May I introduce our panel? We're absolutely honoured to have some very strong and eminent leaders on the panel today. Delighted to have the presence of Her Excellency Ambassador Hirut Zemene from Ethiopia, who is the ambassador of Ethiopia to the EU. I'm also delighted, and we can have a very strong input too from the Minister of Trade for Rwanda, Minister Soraya Hakuzi I'm tripping up. Hazuka Yarem. Apologies to you, Minister. We're also joined today by Sergio Pimenta from the International Finance Corporation. He is the Vice President for Middle East and Africa and has a good perspective on investing in Africa. And then we have two other speakers who have experience on the ground of helping to set up businesses and helping to grow businesses. And that's Anna Akeledo, who's the Executive Director of AfriLabs, and Fabrizio Paganini, who is the founder of Valatech, a startup who is operating now on the African continent. So let's, if I may, start the session with an introduction from Laura Borisova, who is speaking on behalf of the European Commissioner for International Partnerships. She will be talking about the Commission's agenda on prioritizing partnership with Africa and a focus on strengthening the economies and building trading capacity. And the Commissioner has really made this a key role on the agenda. And Laura, can you please share some insights on the Commissioner's approach? It's a big agenda, and we know that you've already started working on looking at how this will evolve. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Celia. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the invitation, indeed, to my commissioner to participate in this year European Business Summit.
Excuse me, Laura, we don't see you. Is your video on? Thank you.
Very welcome. So again, very much on behalf of my commissioner, thank you for this kind invitation, and thank you indeed for giving me the floor. This looks like a very fascinating discussion with a very impressive lineup of speakers, and I indeed very much enjoy being here today. So let me indeed very shortly, because we should leave time for a discussion, share with you the few words of my commissioner on our proposed new Europe-Africa partnership, which is very, very important from our point of view, especially in the context, indeed, of the global recovery from the current crisis. As you probably know, just 2 days after the Commission adopted a new proposal on a new comprehensive strategy with Africa, the COVID crisis hit us and was declared a pandemic. Far from changing our vision for this very important partnership, the crisis has rather shone a light on how relevant all the priorities are and how urgently we must act. Globally, the World Bank predicts the deepest and most synchronized recession since the Second World War. In sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, economic activity is supposed to contract by nearly 3% in 2020, which is again the deepest on record. Many will be pushed into poverty and extreme poverty. But we must not fall into the trap of building back our economies in whichever form. We have the unique opportunity to spearhead a recovery that does not repeat certain mistakes from the past. We can certainly build back better. And in this context, there has never been a better moment for Africa and for Europe to join forces, to build back better. Together, we believe that we can lead a smart transformation and turn some of the great challenges facing us into solutions for a better future. Our proposed priorities, especially around the green transition, the digital transformation, and sustainable investment, hold so many solutions for Africa, but also for Europe and for the world. Let me just make, again, on behalf of my commissioner, 3 brief points on how to go about this. Firstly, we are very much convinced that we need to build on the great Team Europe cooperation that we have done so far in our global response to COVID. Since the start of the pandemic, the EU institutions, our member states, and also the financial institutions working as Team Europe have been leading the international efforts to help support our partners deal with the humanitarian but also socioeconomic consequences of this pandemic. Nearly 8 billion euros have gone to Africa. Going forward, the Team Europe cooperation will remain critical for translating strategic ambitions into sustainable development on the ground. Secondly, our success hinges on working more closely with the EU and what you mentioned, Celia, in your introduction, with the African private sector. With your help, we can generate inclusive and sustainable growth and fight poverty and inequality. We can make rapid progress on areas with great potential to transform the continent, like the digital and the green sectors. And in this regard, investment entrepreneurship, and open lines of communication between businesses and policymakers are critical. Through tools like the external investment plan, we are working hard to prioritize reforms in order to attract more investment, to help entrepreneurs, SMEs, and startups through local business development services and structure, and to support Africa's efforts towards greater regional and continental trade and economic integration, which is going to be a potential game changer for attracting further domestic and foreign investment. For European business, including companies who have expertise in the green and digital.
Excuse me, Laura, I do apologize, but we have not been able to see you. Thank you.
This is bizarre. I don't know why, but okay. So I'll finish very soon, because basically I was making the point on the need to support Africa's efforts. Do you see me now?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Towards greater regional and continental trade and economic integration, which, as I was saying, is a potential game changer for attracting further domestic and foreign investment. For European business, including the companies who have the expertise in the green and digital sectors, this is a huge opportunity. My final point, as part of this new strategy with Africa that I was referring to, our development efforts in Africa will focus increasingly on youth and women. And this is a huge priority for my commissioner personally. We want to support them in fulfilling their potential and helping them to be part of this continent's transformation I was talking about. For example, and I think in the discussion I could give you many more of those concrete, tangible examples, we'll launch soon a significant initiative to support more than 2,500 women-led businesses across Africa with seed capital and startup technical assistance. I thank you very much for your attention, Celia, and I'm really looking forward to further ideas on our future partnership with Africa, and again, how together we carve out a better, a greener, and a more sustainable future. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. That's extremely interesting and exciting agenda. And the focus there that you've given from the Commission. I'd like to move on now to engage with our panel members to hear their perspectives from the African continent. I'm going to start with the representatives from the governments of Ethiopia and Rwanda, both of whom have growing economies and have a lot of strategic policy developments to support their growth. So welcome to you. Madam Ambassador, may I turn to you first and ask you, Ethiopia has a plan of action for creating jobs and boosting trade. How does the EU agenda for this new partnership match with the aims of the Ethiopia plan and the strategies that Ethiopia is pursuing to grow entrepreneurial activity? Perhaps you can give us some insights into the plan and actions in Ethiopia. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, everyone. Madam Laura Borisova, representative of the European Union International Partnership Commission, distinguished minister from Rwanda, and representatives from IFC and the businesses that I have been introduced to. It's a delight to be here and speak about Ethiopia's development plan and possible partnership with the European Union and businesses around the world. So I thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll start out with, as you have said, Madam Moderator, Ethiopia's 10-year plan of action, it's a medium-term plan of action, which has just unfolded, has a lot of points that match with the European Union, plan with Africa. So, it's 100 million population, It's a youthful population, and women hold half of the sky, like many parts of the world. So, diversification and addressing the needs for job and also value addition is very, very important in this 10-year action plan. We are slated to be a middle-income country by 2025, but if not for the COVID situation and other developing, disasters and the like around, like the locust and floods, we will definitely completely be in that category sooner. In terms of figures, as you know, in terms of GDP per capita, we are already there at the lower middle income country. Our youth population is huge. So what are we doing? We are mainly agrarian economy, but we are transiting into light manufacturing industry. But since the transition in the past 2 years under the leadership of Dr. Abiy Ahmed, we are trying to add more sectors that are relevant and that could create a low-hanging fruit, like tourism, ecotourism, green development, and like ICT, which can easily be, leapfrogged, and which could attract a lot of employment for the youth. And we are also focusing on supporting small and medium enterprises. So, the most important thing, diversifying the economy and not focusing on one single, sector. And at the same time, the role of the private sector. More and more chances given to the private sector. And through this, we plan to boost our exports. From the industrial parks, they are about around 20 now. We have gradually managed to expand our exports with true value addition. The huge challenge in Africa and in my country is that our export items are primary products, and due to that, we face a lot of price setting and price taking, not price setting. So, the right price for the right product would come from value addition. So we focus mainly, just to briefly conclude what I would like to say, is that the economic diversification will definitely focus mainly on job creation and also boosting foreign currency earning through, value-added export. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. And that agenda around diversification, I think, is a very exciting one in Africa. There is huge potential, and we hope we'll see some exciting new partnerships to take that agenda forward. If I may, I'll turn now to Minister Hakuziyaremye. Minister, in Rwanda, you do have a very strong agenda to grow trade with international markets. And one of the things that I think is very well known is that you're focusing on building Rwanda as a globally competitive knowledge-based economy. Now, we know that digital offers so much promise for the future. We'd be very pleased to hear from you about how are you working in Rwanda to build this knowledge-based economy with more diversified industries? Thank you. If I may pass to you.
Thank you very much, Celia, and it's a pleasure to be here and to Laura representing Commissioner Opilainen, Excellency Ambassador Zemene, Mr. Sergio Pimenta, and distinguished delegates from private sector. First of all, I wanted to thank the European Business Summit for this invitation to be able to participate to the European Business Summit and also share our policies and strategies geared at developing our SMEs and building long-lasting economic partnership with the European Union. And as you mentioned, Celia, Rwanda is indeed future-oriented when it comes to its vision for private sector growth through the development of our trade and industry sectors, as well as building a knowledge-based economy, which entails that we need to invest a lot in digitalizations, in skills, but also modern infrastructure. And for Rwanda to grow into a knowledge-based economy and diversifying our economies, our export, as well as accessing regional and international markets, as well as facilitating entrepreneurs in starting their businesses are key. And I think if I could give some examples on what Rwanda has able to do as far as investment in infrastructure is concerned, which is really more on the public sector investment, was to make sure that we can have modern infrastructure being in ICT, with fiber optics now covering almost 90% of our country. Second, having also infrastructure that connect us to the world. As you know, Rwanda being a landlocked country, it's important we stay connected to the world by, one, investing in our new international airport, and second, developing our national airline, Rwandair, which now has more than 20 destinations, including Europe and Asia. And I think in addition to that, we really made sure that we develop as fast as we can our industrial sector and manufacturing capacity. And I think Ambassador Zemene has talked about it for Ethiopia. I think for the African countries, really setting up special economic zone and industrial parks have really been a game changer in attracting investment in manufacturing, but also allowing us to diversify our export base. And also looking at our goals to become an upper income country by 2050, it's important that we develop also non-agricultural sectors and create as much as possible off-farm employment so that we can generate more income for our citizens. And in addition to the growth of Rwanda's industrial capacity, we also believe very much in the regional integration for our country to be able to access regional markets. Rwanda is a member of the East African Community, but also a member of the Common Market of Eastern and Southern African countries, and looking forward to the start of trading under the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in January 2021. And these are really some of the steps that we have taken, and I think opening up doors and markets to our private sector, to our entrepreneurs, and also ensuring as we are part of these regional economic communities, what kind of products do we want to sell? And this requires not only being really, I think, at the top of the use of technology in our industries, but also building the skills that we need for that industrial sector development, as well as the services sector. So I think as we continue to partner with the EU, it will be very important to not only, I think about access to finance or funding for our micro and small and medium-sized enterprises, but which partnership as well allow us to build capacity for our entrepreneurs, exchange technology and knowledge, so that, the new economic partnership looks at those aspects as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And very great that you have achieved that high-speed coverage for the internet across Rwanda. That's obviously going to be a key enabler of industrial growth. And interesting to hear also about the diversification strategy in Rwanda. Madam Ambassador, let me just turn to you for further brief, if I may, intervention. We've talked about diversification, but we've also talked about the importance of agriculture across the continent. And Ethiopia's main crop is coffee, and it's a huge export market, but there is great opportunity for growing Africa's local participation in the value chain there, which would deliver more value back to the country. Can you just very briefly tell us a little bit about what you see needs to happen to enable more production of the coffee in country on the continent?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. It's a very interesting question that you have raised to me, because I think coffee is the gift that Ethiopia has given to the world many, many centuries back. And about 15 to 17 million of the Ethiopian 110 million plus population lives by coffee, from coffee and through coffee. Ethiopia, produces Arabica coffee, which is the best in terms of its flavors. The word Arabica joined it through the trading system that happened centuries back when Ethiopian coffee from the city of Kaffa was transported to the Middle East for the trade. What are we trying to value add to this process? Because we have forest coffee, we have specialty coffees. 3 of our brands are, renowned in international coffee chains, like the Yirka Jeffe, Harar, and Sidama Coffee. In 2015, with the partners like the Oxfam, we had promoted a trademarking initiative where at least the farmers will be recognized for what they produce in the coffee chain. It wouldn't add anything, but it would give them name. So this was one of the efforts we're trying to do. Ethiopia exports purely, I can say, on the majority. I can say on the 80%, 90% green beans, while the price for processed coffee is much, much higher. So what is the challenge of not value adding and getting a better value for our exports is mainly because of the trading houses and the large corporations will not allow a new entrant to go into the market. But we need to stand, the European Union and other partners should stand and say that the small farmers that give this best thing to our rooms, to our meeting rooms, to our dining table, needs to get the right price. And we need to work on this together. Of course, it's a mutually beneficial thing. We can't partner with the European companies where they are invited to invest in the coffee sector in processing. In that way, they will also definitely get better productivity chance, because labor is affordable. I would not say cheap, because it's we have mostly trainable and trained labor this time in Ethiopia. But the productivity for electricity is one of the cheapest in the world, less than 0.3 cents per kilowatt. So then, like I told you, trainable labor, and the product itself being there, and having the specialty coffees in Ethiopia, processing would really do wonders for partners, for Ethiopian farmers. So value addition will be very, very important in this process. Value addition will also come, as Madam Moderator said, with the value chain. So it will come with packaging, washing, roasting, other things that can be added within this process. So it is about supporting and going through sustainable development goals, which Ethiopia aligns with its 10 years plan of action. The sustainable development goal is well aligned with this. So, and then also it will give a special gift to the world, not only through the coffee beans, but we have a special coffee ceremony. Coffee for us is not only an export item, but an item that brings together the family, creates reconciliation, creates harmony. So we will give this to the world, and we want to partner. We want to move away from a primary product that's simply focused on green beans export, but it needs international partnership.
Thank you so much. And you've made the observation there that there are many points along the value chain where local resources can be developed and build the livelihoods of people in Ethiopia for, as you say, this great beverage that that most of us enjoy on a daily basis. So thank you for that, and the whole process of diversifying is so important. if I may turn again, Madam Minister, to you. We're looking at investment by the EU, and we're looking at growing investment generally into African countries. We're going to hear in a minute from our colleague from the International Finance Corporation. But I know that Rwanda has been successful in attracting investment funds. And I wonder if you could just very briefly give us kind of overview of what is it that has made that happen? How has Ethiopia been able to achieve, what kind of changes have you made to be more attractive to inward investment?
Thank you again, Celia. I think pre-COVID, Rwanda had been managed to keep a constant growth rates. I think the past 15 years, since 2005, our growth rate, our annual growth rate remained between 8 and 7%. But that consistent growth really was underpinned by strong reforms. First, of our business environment, where we strive to create an enabling investment environment, making sure that regulations are in place are business friendly, and that we sort of make efforts to overhaul our rigid, I would say, regulatory framework which we used to have. And today, Rwanda is ranked number 2 in Africa in ease of doing business, and also in the Global Competitiveness Index. And we have put in place also incentives for attracting potential investors in strategic sectors that we had identified, be it in manufacturing or tourism, but also making sure that our business environment, as it's assessed annually, be it through the World Bank ranking, sort of results in new investor-friendly reforms each year. And the other reform that we had to conduct is the automation of most of our public services, so that also investors, have a one-stop center where all their needs can be catered for through the Rwanda Development Board, and automate as much as possible the services, being in applying to get land, in paying taxes, which is now all services that are done online and in a timely fashion. And I think also what we have tried to put in place is to make sure that as we develop and attract much more investment in the country, is put in place sort of strategies and policies to make sure that we're building a green economy with single-use plastics, which have recently been banned, as well as the use of plastic bags, which the country had banned for over 12 years now, which at the time when that harsh decision was taken, people were saying it should not be a priority, that we think too much about environment while we're dealing with really rebuilding our nation. But 12 years down the road, we see the difference it has made. And we keep being really active internationally in aligning with other economies, are parties to the Paris Agreement, the Montreal Protocol, and the signed Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol as well. We also have a name, and being a minister in charge of trade and industry, when I say that we work hand in hand with a Minister of Environment, sometimes it raises brows, but the fact that Rwanda aims at being carbon neutral by 2050 means that any investment we're doing in our economic sectors are aligned with that goal. And finally, for investors that we are attracting, we also request that they go through what we call an environment impact assessment. And an investor can only receive an investor's certificate once they've gone through that environment impact assessment. And these are provisions that we think combine both, our goal to attract investments in economic sectors, but also making sure that we're building a green economy. And the last point is really how we've invested heavily in human capacity, with a lot of emphasis in education, in science, technology, and mathematical sciences, and making sure that we have inclusion of girls at every stage of education and leadership, which is now something we're really proud of, to make sure that we have an inclusive growth as we go forward. So this is, in brief, the strategies that I think Rwanda can share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And very interesting on the range of measures that the government has led to create this environment that's attractive to invest in and enables entrepreneurs to and finance institutions to come and invest in Africa. Thank you both. I think that's a very good segue to now introduce Mr. Sergio Pimenta from the International Finance Corporation. They are deeply engaged in funding the private sector across the continent, and from that they have a macro view of many of the issues that are contingent on making building the strength of the private sector. Sergio, welcome to you. And can I just ask you, as the EU and Africa focus in this way on building trade and investing in the private sector, to be able to participate much more strongly in the global economy. Part of that, of course, is enabling small and medium businesses, and we've heard from our previous speakers the importance of diversification and enabling more engagement by local entrepreneurs in value chains. Can you tell us, from your experience investing in Africa, briefly, what are some of the challenges that you see to making that happen, and what is the support that they need to grow and build capacity and help Africa on its journey to growth? Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you very much, Celia, and thank you very much for having me in this panel. It's an honor to be here together with this distinguished panelists. So good afternoon, everyone. I think you're asking the right question when it comes to looking at how the private sector is doing in Africa, and how it's growing, and how it's also facing some challenges with the current situation. And if we step back, let's say a year from today, and we look at where the continent was going, you could see a very strong growth compared with other regions, and the path of development that was quite clear, with governments taking a lot of measures that would allow private sector to thrive and to contribute to the development of the economies. I think today the scenario, the landscape has changed quite a bit in quite unprecedented ways, and we are forecasting, the World Bank and the IMF are forecasting for the first time a recession in Africa at the continent level, the first time in a quarter of a century, which is really going to impact all the gains in development that have been done over the previous years. So we really need to very quickly, all of us, act to make sure that we support Africa in rebuilding and fighting what's happening with this pandemic, so that we have a faster recovery and a better recovery. And I really like what we heard from the representatives from the Ethiopia and Rwanda about the way you rebuild in a better way, in a greener way, in a way that is more inclusive and fairer to everyone. I think this is really the way we have to do it. When we look at the key challenges today, I mean, the obvious challenge is the impact of the pandemic. This is a pandemic that is having economic impacts in terms of disrupting value chains and trade, in terms of limiting also access to finance, and giving a higher perception of risk of SMEs, and is impacting also some particular sectors more than others. I mean, the ambassador mentioned the impact on tourism, which is a very large source of jobs, second largest source of jobs after agribusiness, agriculture in Africa. So we need to focus on those sectors and realize, I think the African Union quoted that at least $50 billion would be lost in the pandemic, because in the tourism sector, because of COVID-19. So these are very important impacts that we need to measure. to address. I think the second challenge that the continent is facing is the issue of digital connectivity. And the continent had launched big efforts over the last years to really increase its access to the digital economy. I think as of getting into the crisis, about 520 million people in Africa had access to internet, but that still leaves about 800 million people that don't have access to internet. And this is this challenge is something that becomes even more important in the context of the pandemic, where SMEs and consumers are all turning more to digital platforms versus what they were doing before. So this is one of the areas that I think needs to be addressed. And then the third one that I also wanted to mention is the question of access to finance and having a business environment that is conducive to private sector to develop. And again, I'm talking about business environment and access to finance for small entrepreneurs, for small enterprises that have always challenged, and it's been true across the world. It's always been a challenge to get access to finance when you're a small entrepreneur, but it is a more acute issue when you look at what's happening today in the African continent. So how do we address these three challenges? Briefly, I would say that first on addressing the challenge of the response of the COVID pandemic, at the IFC we have put together a response plan together with our colleagues at the World Bank that is very much organized around three phases: a phase of relief, which is sort of immediately helping companies that are the most impacted and how we can help them weather the crisis. I mean, we got a fast track facility of $8 billion that was approved in March, that we have already deployed more than half, and that we are planning to finalize deploying in the next few months. And this is really to help companies that get an immediate impact of the crisis, to help them maintain the jobs, if possible, create more jobs, but maintain activity on the shorter term. And then we have a second phase, which is really a phase of helping. We call it restructuring, meaning helping reestablish the value chains, helping governments also in their efforts to support private sector throughout the crisis and the pandemic. And this means working on the business environment, working on the bottlenecks that we see so that we can help private sector regain, I would say, its role in the economies and contribute to development. And then the third phase that we've also started working at the same time, because they are not sequential, they need to work in parallel, is really a phase of recovery. And that means thinking about how the world will be after the pandemic, and how are we helping the private sector develop the skills they need, make the investments they need, so that they can really thrive in that new world that will come. And I'm saying this because we are in a context where the African continent entered into the crisis in a situation where debt was already high, so the fiscal space that governments had was limited in order to support the shocks. To help mitigate the shocks of the crisis. We've seen over the last years an increasing role of private sector in Africa, and with the crisis, we see that actually we will need this even more. Governments will not have the fiscal space to do all the investments that are needed to support the development of the continent. So it's the right approach to leverage private sector. Private sector helps create jobs, helps maintain the level of activity in the economy, and grows that. And this is particularly true for small and medium companies that are the biggest source of employment throughout Africa. So this is really something that we need to do. I will maybe just end here, but I wanted to just, if you allow me, Celia, just to highlight in the responses that we need to bring, whether it's on digital economy, whether it's on access to finance, that there are a certain number of themes that we really need to keep very at the front of our thinking. And the two themes that I think are very important for the development of Africa going forward is, one is gender, because we need to unlock the potential of the African that women in Africa have the opportunities to contribute to the economy in a full way. And the second, which has been mentioned by the Honourable Minister Akuzia Reme, and as well as the Ambassador, is the green economy, and making sure that we are promoting a world that will be more inclusive and more fair in terms of climate, so that we have a potential to do a lot of investment in Africa that will contribute to improve the climate agenda. So let me maybe stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Very, very interesting views there. I'd like to move on quickly. The challenge, or the opportunity, I would say, to leverage digital technologies as a force for business growth across all industries is really a very, very exciting one. And I'm delighted that we have two members of the panel who are actively engaged in this. I'm going to turn, first of all, to Anna, who is the Executive Director of AfriLabs. They are a network of more than 200 organizations supporting innovation and digital growth in Africa across more than 40 countries. So, Anna, can you just very briefly talk about what's critical support for these entrepreneurs to grow their businesses, and perhaps you can give us an example of a business that has successfully grown from your engagement with the sector across Africa. Anna, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Celia, and thank you for allowing me to be part of the Business Summit and to share a panel with other distinguished panelists. Good afternoon, everyone. So as you rightly mentioned, a number of startups across Africa are building great businesses. They're scaling and in some cases exiting. FinTech is an example of a sector with many African startups building innovative financial technology solutions, which also have a huge role to play in contributing to various other sectors in boosting the African economy. A recent success story is Paystack, a Nigerian startup which just got acquired for $200 million by a larger global company, Stripe, to scale across Africa, and has had hundreds of thousands of small businesses since it launched just 5 years ago. So that's a very good example of a high growth startup which has grown exponentially in the last 5 years. Now, e-commerce and other trade facilitation platforms, products and services are also great examples of tech businesses bringing innovation and inclusion to trade and the creation of jobs, which we'll see more of with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, I like the fact that Sergio earlier on from IFC spoke about the importance of gender, as we'll also see more women who own over 50% of micro, small, and medium enterprises participating in trade via e-commerce platforms and other digital products and services. Now, however, for all these to happen, we need the right infrastructure and the right policies in place. Currently, less than a third of the African continent and population have access to broadband connectivity. And for majority of the population who have, internet is quite expensive or with very low bandwidth. I've been just crossing my fingers to make sure that my internet connectivity on this call just stays good. So it's been quite unreliable and difficult to consume digital products. And as such, to support the growth of these businesses, we need to focus on increasing broadband connectivity and other infrastructure across Africa by pushing for policies which will lower the cost of increasing broadband connectivity and providing internet facilities by the private sector, as well as significantly decrease the cost of consuming internet services. Now, also through public-private partnerships, we need to invest in other forms of infrastructure that support the building and consumption of tech platforms, products, and services, such as access to green, sustainable energy. I love the fact that Honorable Soraya mentioned Rwanda's roadmap, which is focused on green, sustainable energy, and the previous distinguished speakers have also spoke about the importance of sustainable and green plans. We need to invest in data centers, innovation centers, and other intra-African interoperable systems needed to support these businesses scale successfully across Africa. And this, of course, is in addition to other key inputs needed, such as direct funding for startups by both private sector investors, institutional investors, development finance institutions, business development support, mentorship, and of course, new access to markets needed for startups to grow, not just within the African continent, but across the world. So these are just a few examples of what's needed among many.
I think the experience of the AfriLabs has gained from working with SMEs and helping them to grow is extremely valuable, and I know the network shares that learning amongst itself. Now, I've got an eye on the time, and we do want to have just a little bit of time for questions. But Fabrizio, can you just briefly tell us about an example of a business in Morocco that you have worked with to help them through enabling their or building their digital capacity? Because digital really is in the agri-sector where you focus, something that can really improve incomes and help businesses to grow. So can I just ask you to take 1 or 2 minutes to tell us about an example in Morocco? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for welcoming here with this expert panelist. So Valertech is a startup dedicated to data management and the farming industry. Yeah, so data is a new oil, for farmers to carry out digital and ecological transition and to get retributed with this. So the opportunity that digital represents through this current crisis to improve agriculture yield and ecological transition should be taken into consideration to accelerate the funding of technological adoption in Moroccan agriculture area where I'm now. That's why it's crucial really for us to propose a project in line with the market expectation here in terms of agricultural role and environmental data management needs, taking into account the issue of social adoption is crucial. So we are currently carrying a POC, a proof of concept, in Morocco, testing our technology of data management, focusing on analyzing the environmental performance of the farm, analyzing water balance, soil and climate data, and carbon balance, evaluation of organic material content into the soil, really relate to ecological transition, adaptation to climate change. So this POC is linked to the European Green Deal objective applied to Morocco right now regarding the new common agriculture policy based on climate financing, retribution, and ecological grant allocation and regarding the Moroccan Green Generation Plan 2020-2030, based on financing the ecological transition. So the final goal is to set up a database to help the agricultural ministry and related organizations as banks to determine environmental performance and allocate grants to accordingly based on water and carbon balance. Just to figure out, and I will be ending with this, some concrete example. Moroccan exporters aim to reduce the carbon footprint. We have Engie Service Morocco, one with Asmex, who I think beginning of November, they decide to allow access to innovative solutions to comply with the new requirements of the European Union markets on decarbonization. Another example regarding agricultural development in Morocco, they put subsidy of about 4.2 billion grant coming from the agricultural development funding on this. And I know that France also financing bilateral agro-industrial project around the world. We're working with some FASEP one. And I think this context of agroecology and agriculture practice is aiming to preserve natural resource and ensuring I think decent revenue for farmers. If we just mentioned the FAO report mentioning that we need to improve, the agroecological awareness, and I think we need to measure ecologically this efficiency. I think is one of the main one I will share with you today.
Thank you so much, Fabrizio. And I think, as you say, there is so much potential, and we hope to see the more embedding of the kinds of solutions, approaches, and help that you're giving to the agriculture sector really spread across the continent, because there are many pockets of great innovation and development, and some very, very good schemes coming. We don't have time today to do the 360 degrees on the agriculture sector. There's some very, very interesting initiatives happening. Now, we have only 5 minutes left, and I would like, if we may, to just to take 1 or 2 of the questions that we have from from the audience. The first of these is from an African-based SME focused on recycling and the circular economy. Madam Ambassador, I think this is a question to you. Where can they find more information about the proposed support that Ethiopia is looking to enable these circular economy and environmental businesses?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. We are trying to build eco lodges around the country. We have beautiful destinations, but they need to be enhanced with the capacity in terms of tourism infrastructure. We are solely trying to focus on ecotourism around these attractions. So this is one area. We can link this gentleman or lady to the Ethiopian Investment Commission, and we can provide information on how to. As my sister from Rwanda, Her Excellency the Minister has mentioned, we have a number of incentives to encourage investors to come, so they will see if they would like that. So this is one important thing. And the other thing is supporting women that are in the small businesses, as was said earlier, alluded by, I think, the AfriLab representative. Many of the women in the continent are in the informal sector, those that are in the small and micro enterprises, because they don't have an access to finance. Of course, the FC representative has mentioned the same thing. So, they, work on providing handy goods for tourism in many of the areas, but they don't work in a very viable environment. So access to finance is very, very important. In Ethiopia, we say that we are entrepreneurs. We are inherently entrepreneurs because it's a country of smallholder farmers. So people are accustomed from the early stage to do business. But business needs boosting in terms of financing and know-how. So this very important link from centers of excellence, incubations, and job creation at the level, whether it is in the industrial parks or in the small and medium enterprises, is very, very crucial.
Thank you, madam. Now, I've got another question, and we've literally got two minutes. We're looking at trading agreements, and I'm very excited by the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and the EU obviously is looking at how to enable trade between the two continents. I have a question which I'd like very briefly, if you would, to ask first the Minister and then Mr. Pimento to reply to. The question says, what influence does the tariff system of the EU have on the value chain of African industries and the economic partnerships? Do you see that's hindering the general integration in Africa? Are tariffs something that we need to address together through this partnership? Minister, is this something that's been a consideration in Rwanda?
Thank you. I think there's been historically agreements between African countries and the EU, and especially I think through the Cotonou Accord or the new Europe partnership agreements that the EU signed and now is reviewing with the East African community to allow access to the European market, especially for least developed countries and middle-income countries, which are the majority in Africa, to be able to sell to the European market, quota-free and duty-free, and this has helped. However, I think there's the details. The devil is in the details, as in the standards required to be able to export those products is something that I think in the partnership, as we also build capacity for our exporters to maintain the standard and qualities that of products that we can sell. And I think also, as ambassadors, the men mentioned, value-added products also need to have an access to the European market. But I don't believe that having quota-free, duty-free applied to African products or products from African countries has hindered the partnership. But it's really the mindset of, that access has historical reasons, and now how do we help develop also the local entrepreneurs and exporters to not only have quality products, but also be able to access finance to be able to sort of scale up their activities as well. Thank you. Thank
you so much. Sergio, do you have just a sentence on tariffs and whether tariffs are an inhibitor of trade between?
Thank you. So just look on in one sentence, I think developing trade, and I mentioned this earlier on, developing trade within Africa is I think a big priority for the continent and will create a lot of opportunities. At the same time, it is very important that Africa not only remains but grows its role in the global value chains, right? In terms of having a bigger role in the global trade. The potential for growth of global trade sourced from Africa or going into Africa is significant, particularly growing from Africa. So I know trade discussions are always complicated ones, but all I can say on this point is that it is important that we get to a situation where the trade resumes and gets back at higher levels, because this will have a very positive impact on the economies.
Thank you very much. I'm so much regret that we don't have another hour, because there is so much that could be shared. I think that we need to reflect that yes, there are huge challenges in Africa, but the opportunity is enormous. And I've been very impressed by what we've heard from the speakers today, at how comprehensively the leadership in Africa through the governments is looking at it, and how there are many support mechanisms who really are have a good understanding of the needs and some of the strategic measures that can be implemented to enable Africa's growth and to achieve that development that Africa really has the potential for. I'm sure, and I hope very much, and Laura, with the Commission, we will take this agenda further forward, and the dialogue between the two continents will continue and be into a more formalized partnership through the EU-AU summit next year. But I'd like to inform everybody now that we need to close this session, because there is now, following this, an interview or commentary from the German Parliamentary State Minister for Agriculture to share his view about agriculture on the continent. The Minister Hans-Joachim Fuchtel will follow on from this session. So for the participants who are watching this session, I encourage you to stay and hear that, because I think it's all part of this agenda about enabling growth in Africa. I thank you all so much for your time, and I hope that there will be plenty more opportunities to engage in this discussion, to share the experience, and to achieve the results that everybody wants. So thank you to all the speakers so much for your time, and thank you to EBS for enabling this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.